Okay, Riz, so tell me why you think we should start this podcast.
So I don't think it's a podcast really. I think it's really more of a conversation, and we're capturing snippets of conversations that we're having. And the idea really came to me when over the last 1 year, maybe two now, we've been walking every day, and we have these amazing conversations, reflections during our walks. And one of the things that happens during those walks is that we really have taken the things that we learn in those walks and really improved our relationship. So I think today the first thing I want to do, and the first way we want to start off these conversations really, is about another interesting question you asked me on our walk today, is that we say that we've really improved our relationship. So if a newly a couple who's about to get married came to us for advice, to ask us, what advice would you give us as we enter into this marriage, and as we are getting married, you've been there and you say you have a great relationship and a great marriage, so what are those things that you would tell us that we should know? So I
Yeah.
think that's how this entire conversation started today. So I think you made a very interesting point, and maybe you want to lead in with that. The thing that we talked about, shared values.
Yeah, I think so. Shared values in any marriage, it's it's a very important thing to have the same vision and the same values that you base your relationship on. Any partnership, any teamwork, any union of any kind cannot work if the two people or the people involved in that union are not working towards the same goals, the same mission, the same vision, have the same ideologies, mindset, and I guess that's why people aim to marry in the same community, but that's not enough. It has to be the same, the shared values and the shared vision for your life, and maybe even shared interests. So if you are possible, if you can possibly get together and understand where your values and vision are, if they align before you get married, and if it's something that you're doing deeper into your marriage, if you can realign your vision to come together on the same page, that is where the first step of working together in a good relationship begins, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. Totally agree. And I think one of the reasons that we had our troubles at the beginning of our marriage, and we can talk about that at a different time. But I think one of the things that really helped us always has been that we've always had this shared vision of what we wanted from life, and
Yeah,
I think that's really helped us a lot.
yeah.
So moving on, I think the second point that we kind of came upon as we were discussing, what advice we would give, people who are just going to get married, is about. One second, I'll take a pause. I'll go to edit this out.
Teamwork, I think. I mean, taking off from the first point, it's a shared vision and shared values leads you to become a team. And being a team, I think you were talking about this during our
Yeah,
walk. That is very important.
yeah, I think absolutely. The second point that we would say is that, a lot of people talk about a marriage, a lot of people talk about it being a partnership. But I think what's most important, and I think that's where we are coming from, is that it's important to be part of a team. And a team is slightly different from a partnership, because in a team you're on the same side, you always got each other's back. And I think that's something that all healthy relationships, I find, call themselves a team. I think a good judge or a good gauge of how good someone's relationship is actually the number of times they use the word that we are a team, or how many times they refer to
We are
themselves
doing
as a
this
team.
together. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And the more they call each themselves a team, the more likely they have a great relationship, because really that's what it takes to really have a good relationship and a good marriage, to be part of a team.
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so uh, you know the third point, I think, which is critical, and I think it's a slightly deeper conversation, but we'll talk about it in as briefly as we can, is that really to improve your relationship with others, the first place you need to start is improve your relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
So unless your relationship with yourself is healthy, your relationship with others, and that includes your spouse, is not going to be as good as it needs to be, or as good as it can be. And when it comes to improving your relationship with yourself, it's again a very deep topic. But I guess one of the most basic things when it comes to improving your relationship with yourself is being able to spend time with yourself, is being able to you know believe in yourself, is having confidence in yourself, is really kind of working actively through all the mental barriers and roadblocks and limiting beliefs that might be holding you back. And I think that work, internal work within yourself, is very important to improve a relationship.
Yeah, I think that's where I have made a lot of progress in the last few years, and that's helped me grow a lot more wholesome as a person, and that's why I think that is what I'm bringing into the marriage, and it helps our marriage as well. I know you've also worked tremendously on that, but my journey has been slightly different, and we'll talk about it in another podcast. But I think that is so important what you mentioned, to be whole, to be um, you know, to work on yourself before you work on your marriage, is a very, very important point. You can't bring an empty self or a half person into a marriage. You need to come as whole. And that whole is a person who's able to who's worked on his or her self confidence, and is sure of herself and is constantly working to improve. And on that note, I think also comes the point that taking responsibility for yourself, which we
Absolutely.
constantly talk about on our walks. So, yeah, I mean, taking
Yeah,
responsibility for who you are as a person and your role in the
absolutely.
marriage.
Absolutely. And that leads us nicely into our next point, which honestly surprises a lot of people. When they first hear it, they feel like, okay, and that's a bit strange. And I say that one of the best things you can do is never do anything for your spouse. And that confuses people. And what I mean by that is that you should never do something for the other person. You should do it because you. There's someone at the door. 1 second.
Yeah,
We'll edit this part out.
I'll pause it. Okay.
So yeah, one of those surprising things that I tell people is never do anything for your partner.
Yeah,
And what I mean by that is that don't do things because you think that's what your partner wants or that's what your partner has asked you to do. Do those things because that's the kind of person you are.
yeah,
I'll give you a small example.
mm,
You used to tell me that you don't like the wash basin being wet after I've used it, because it's kind of uncomfortable for you to go and use the wash basin and everything's wet around it when after I've used it, and you would like a dry basin. Now, since the day you told me that, I have been ensuring that those after I use the wash basin, I leave it dry. Now, to the person who's looking in, might think that I'm doing it because you told me to do it. But the truth is that if I did it because you told me to do it, at some point I will start feeling resentment towards it, because I will feel that I'm doing something that I don't want to, and you have asked me to do, and I'm doing something that I actually don't want to. But the reason I leave that basin dry after I use it is not because you've asked me. The reason I leave it dry is because I realize that that's the kind of person I want to be. I want to be the kind of person who leaves the basin the way I like to find it. So when you told me I like to leave it dry, what made me realize is that yes, even I like to go to a basin and I find it nice and dry and clean. So
yeah,
of course, somebody else would like to do it,
yeah,
receive it as well in
yeah.
that way. So that made me realize that what, forget about the fact that you've asked me, but I want to be the kind of person who leaves the basin dry so that it's nice to use for the next person. And there are
It's always,
countless examples.
yeah, it's always these tinier things, right, that build resentment. It's not the bigger things one does, but it's all these smaller changes you make in life, or the smaller things you put up with, slippers
Yeah.
lying over the floor, a wet towel on the bed,
Wet towel on the
you
bed.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's always these smaller things that build resentment. And when you start to take responsibility, again, I think it kind of interlinks with the previous point as well. When you start taking responsibility to be a person um, uh, who's who does things that others would find easier to live with, it just makes you a nicer person to live with, right? And and you do that not because you want to do it for the other person. You do it because that's the kind of person you are. You want to be a better person, right? It's always about self improvement, taking responsibility, showing up well for yourself first before you show up well for another person.
Yeah,
All interlinked, I guess. And
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And I think the last piece of advice and the most one again, I think every piece of advice is important, but I think this one is critical because not only will it improve your marriage, but I believe it will improve every relationship in your life, and that is being a better listener.
yeah,
I think one thing that is tremendously lacking in the world today is listening, and I think a lot of people believe that listening is a passive exercise, where nothing could be further from the truth. Listening is actually a very active exercise, and it's a skill that honestly I could talk about for an hour. I mean, there have
right.
been so many
Yeah,
books written about it, and endless wisdom around the power of listening. So I won't get into such detail here, but suffice to say that I would definitely, you know, find a couple of those great books. And in fact, I have a couple of recommendations, and we can put it in the notes with this recording, or in the post that I used to share it. And those books and upping, leveling up on the skill of listening will change your life, will change your relationship, will ensure you have a great marriage. And I can't stress this enough, it will ensure that all your relationships, whether it's in business, whether it's life, will all improve significantly
I
just by
think
this one skill.
absolutely. I have to add that in our relationship, that the point that we started to improve on our relationship was when we started to, of course, we did all of the previous points as well. We followed all of those, but it was when we started to listen to each other. You started to listen to me and understand not the words, but what were the emotions behind the words? What was I trying to tell you? What was I feeling? And you heard that, and I felt seen, I felt heard, and that's when I started to feel like I was part of this, a very important part in this relationship. You know, before we go though, I feel like there's one more point I want to add, which is the point where we again started to improve our relationship. We started to do something together that really brought us together. It was a shared activity of a walk, which we followed religiously every single day, and we've been doing it for a few years now. And that's really made a, that's, one second, Riz. I need to pause. Yeah, I just want to add one more point, Riz, and before we close this conversation, this is a very important point. Many people always talk about in partnerships and relationships, you're given the advice of shared activity, do something together. And couples usually go into this whole thing of let's dance, take up dance lessons or join a book club. But that I think is great if you can, even if it works for you and if it's a shared interest. But I feel like that shared activity is something that truly transformed our marriage. It brought us closer, and we, when we started to share one activity, which was walking together every single day, we've been doing that for a few years now. It started, I think, almost 4 years ago, and consistently over the past 2 years, maybe, we've been doing that every single day. We talk, we share our lives, we share our stories from our previous days, we meditate, almost a moving meditation together, and that has really united our minds. It has brought us on the same page. We listen to each other, we fight it out if we need to, we we express ourselves, and both to each other and to ourselves. So that's been a huge change, a change maker, deal breaker, not deal breaker, sorry, but a change maker in our marriage. And if that's one takeaway for any couple, whether in newly into their marriage or deep into their marriage, if they can start maybe walking together or shared an activity of this kind together, where they really communicate and hear each other, give each other that space and time to um, cherish time with each other. That is something I think
Yeah,
can change a lot.
I think it can be an activity, it can be a hobby. It just gives them something to be again part of the
Bound
same team
together.
on, and kind of links back to the points that we discussed in the earlier parts of this conversation. Yeah,
Yeah,
so I think it would be quite good advice to a couple who are entering this realm of marriage, and I do believe that they actually would benefit greatly from these lessons,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and take it forward. And I think there's one big point that especially in our Indian culture, maybe it's kind of advertised or it's promoted or it's encouraged or it's said, maybe it's not
It's
encouraged but it's
mindset
said
more than anything else.
that marriage is a compromise.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't. In fact, nothing in your life should be a compromise. It should be a choice. And please, I would tell every person getting married or in a marriage, please do not have this mindset that marriage is a compromise. Marriage can be a beautiful thing, and it takes work, but nothing in life is a compromise. And I definitely wouldn't encourage them to take this mindset into that marriage.
Yeah.
Great. So I think that's a wrap.
Yep.
Fantastic. I think not bad for our first effort. I mean, we just sat down and hit record. We didn't really prepare, and I think that's how we'll roll in future as well. Authentic, real, not made up, and hopefully this will be something that really helps someone. You never know. Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.